Good day everyone, I'm Sebastian T. Francisco and I'm here today to discuss Lesson 8, which is about learners with emotional and behavioral disorders. But before we start, let us know first the learning objectives of this lesson. So by the end of this lesson, you should be able to number 1, understand the issues surrounding or understanding of emotional or behavioral disorders. Number 2, define and enumerate the classification, characteristics, and the educational approaches appropriate for this type of children. Number 3, provide examples of academic and behavioral interventions often used on learners with behavioral or emotional disorders. Now let's move on to the discussion of the topic. Many children with emotional and behavioral disorder do not have the access to appropriate guidance. These individuals may experience difficulty later in life, like academic failure and unemployment, if they can't get a proper guidance. That is why I think we should invest some time and effort to look after these children. Children with problematic behaviors share at least three common experiences. Number one, their behavior are almost always upsetting to those who are around them. Number two, they are often blamed for their disability by those around them. And number three, they experience discrimination and isolation. So what is emotional and behavioral disorder? Emotional and behavioral disorder is defined as an emotional disability, the inability to build interpersonal relationships with other people that hinder them to have a social life. There are four dimensions to assess the behavior of an individual. Number one, frequency. It refers to how often a behavior occurs. Number two, duration. It refers to the length of time a behavior occurs. Number three, latency. It is about the age appropriateness of the behavior. Number four is intensity, and it refers to the severity of the behavior. Now let's discuss the studies and the concepts about emotional and behavioral disorders. So over the past few years, there have been numerous studies about emotional and behavioral disorders. And these studies help us understand emotional and behavioral disorders more. Disturbed and disturbing behavior. According to James Kaufman, there is a clear distinction between disturbed and disturbing behavior. He noted that some behaviors are inappropriate and not to others because of different expectations. He also stated that a behavior is disturbing when it happens in a certain place at a certain time with the presence of certain individuals, while on the other hand, disturbed behavior happens in many settings and is a part of an individual's behavioral pattern. The transient nature of problematic behavior. Based on a study conducted by Rubin and Barlow, it is common for us to have periods in our lives where we feel conflicted and stressed. These periods can occur at times when we feel vulnerable. This can result to some disturbing behavior as a response to an event, like for example, getting a bad grade or losing someone you love. But it may be transient and can pass after some time. Typical and atypical behavior. Some children with emotional and behavioral disorders show unusual behaviors that are not normal for their age. For example, children with Tourette syndrome tend to demonstrate an odd behavior like cursing and giving inappropriate comments. These behaviors are classified as atypical and considered as disturbed by some professionals. Variability in cultural and social standards of behavior. The disorderliness of a behavior sometimes depends on one's belief or culture. Hitting someone, sexual behavior, swearing, and physical aggression are a few examples of behavior that is considered as disordered by some people because it violates the norms and social standards of an individual's culture. Now let's move on to the common types of emotional and behavioral disorders. Number one, ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It is a disorder marked by an ongoing pattern of inattention and hyperactivity that interferes with development. Number two, autism spectrum disorder. Autism spectrum disorder is a complex developmental condition that involves persistent challenges in social interaction, nonverbal and verbal communication. Number three, anxiety disorder. It is a mental illness that brings severe high and low moods and changes in sleep, energy, thinking, and behavior. So, how do we classify these individuals with emotional and behavioral disorders? Well, there are two ways to classify them. Number one is by using clinically derived classification system. So this classification system is used to describe childhood, adolescent, and adult mental disorders based on the description of symptoms, severity, and information about variation of disorders. Number two is by using statistically derived classification system. This system is developed to analyze the patterns of behavior based on statistical procedures that characterize children with EBD. Under this system, there are two global dimensions that have been identified. These dimensions are externalizing disorders and internalizing disorders. So let's start with externalizing disorders. Externalizing disorders is also known as uncontrolled disorders, and it refers to aggressive behaviors like throwing a tantrum and acting out. These behaviors are usually disturbing to others and can result to disturbance in the classroom. On the other hand, internalizing disorders, also known as over-control disorders, refers to the behavior that are less noticeable like anxiety and depression. People with these disorders do not create chaos in contrast to people with externalizing disorders. Now let's move on to the characteristics of learners with emotional and behavioral disorders. Let's start off with their learning characteristics. According to James Kaufman and Landrum, people with EBD usually score in the low average range on measures of intelligence based on the consistent results from researches conducted. A major concern here is that people with EBD can suffer from school failure despite having average intellectual ability. One suspected reason is that people with EBD experience difficulties because they lack motivation. Next one is their social characteristics. By far, this is the most noticeable characteristic of people with EBD. They have difficulty in building relationships with peers, especially those showing aggressive behavior. They often experience rejection from their peers as a result. And they also have high rates of being incarcerated or being in prison because of their reckless actions. And last one, let's talk about their communication characteristics. People with EBD have a hard time expressing themselves. They use fewer words per sentence, have a difficulty staying in a topic, and they often use language or words that is not appropriate or applicable to a social conversation. This contributes to the challenges that they experience. So as future teachers, what can we do? How do we deal with them? Well, there are many proactive interventions that we can do. Number one, time management. Teachers need to maximize their students' engagement time by arranging their schedule in a way that is efficient. I've mentioned before that those children with EBD experience difficulties in academics. That is why the teacher should try to maximize the time spent in learning instructions to make the students focus on tasks. Number two, transition management. Transition times are situations where disruptive behaviors are increased. Teachers can manipulate these situations by giving the students specific directions on how to do tasks in an organized manner. Practicing these transition routines and giving them praise every after smooth transitions is the key to a peaceful classroom environment. Number three, proximity and movement management. It is all about making sure that high traffic areas are free from any congestion, ensuring the sufficient space of the students to avoid inappropriate behavior, and developing classroom rules for maintaining the orderliness of classroom space and equipments. Number 4, classroom arrangement. It is the physical layout of the classroom. This includes the students' seating arrangements based on the activity that will be conducted. For example, rows for giving out direct instructions, circular for discussions, and cluster arrangements for group work. Place disruptive learners in the action zone and near the teacher for frequent monitoring. And lastly, number 5, classroom ambience. This refers to the feeling that someone gets when entering a classroom. An ideal classroom must be visually appealing and show orderliness to achieve a perfect classroom environment. Based on studies, attractive classrooms influence learners' behaviors in a positive way, which is good because it will minimize unwanted distractions.
Good day everyone, I'm Carl Justin Miranda and I'll discuss Lesson 9, which is the learners who are blind or have low vision. Before we start, let us know first the lesson objectives. By the end of this lesson, the student and teacher should be able to, first, describe the educational provisions for students with visual disabilities. Second, enumerate and discuss the types and causes of the problems of visions. Third, identify his or her own visual condition based on basic tests available and demonstrate genuine appreciation for the learners who strive hard for their studies despite of their condition. So, if you are color blindness, it means you see colors differently compared to people with normal vision. Most of the time, color blindness makes it hard to tell the difference between certain colors. Usually, color blindness runs in families. There is no cure, but they recommend to use special glasses and contact lenses to help correcting the vision. Most people who are colorblind can adjust and do not have problems with everyday activities. Color blindness. Color blindness is a genetic condition, although it can also be the result of injury, disease, or aging. Color blindness occurs when you are unable to see colors in a normal way. It is also known as a color deficiency. So, about vision loss. So, what is vision loss? It is losing your ability to see well without some sort of vision correction. It is referred to as blindness or low vision. It is the total inability or partial inability to see. There are three main groups of vision loss categorized by the Blind and Low Vision Education Network. First one is educational blind. Students who are educational blind cannot use vision for learning. Instead, they use Braille, which is a system of touch, reading, and writing for blind persons in which raised dots represent the letters of the alphabet. Braille is reading by moving the hand from left to right along each line. It also includes audio, tactile tools, and aids. The next one is low vision. Students with low vision can use corrected vision for learning. They use low vision aids, for example, people who are wearing glasses or may need access to large print learning materials and software. The third one is correctable low visions. Students with correctable vision can use corrected vision for learning without any difficulties or additional aids. It is the same with the second one, which uses eyeglasses or contact lens to achieve clear vision. The impact of the impairment on learning will vary significantly according to the nature and extent of vision loss. Some students will have been born without vision. Others will have lost it gradually, and some will have no vision at all. So let us know the types of vision problem and its causes. The most common childhood vision problems are: first, blurred vision; second, crossed eyes; the third one is lazy eye. So the first one is blurred vision. This problem depends on the vision of a person. It may be nearsightedness and farsightedness. An example of nearsightedness is you can see clearly up close but blurry in the distance. An example of farsightedness is you can see clearly in the distance but blurry up close. These two are opposite but have the same problem of blurred vision. There is also a problem called astigmatism. It is another condition that causes blurred vision because of the shape of the cornea. These conditions affect the shape of the eye and how the eye sees. They can be corrected by the use of eyeglasses, contact lenses, and in some cases, surgery. The second type of vision problem is cross eyes. It is a condition in which eyes do not properly align with each other when looking at an object. It occurs when the eyes do not line up. Cross eyes can still be treated and reversed if you detected it early in life. If left untreated, cross eyes can cause lazy eye. The third type of vision problem is lazy eye. It is a reduced vision in one eye caused by abnormal visual development early in life. It is a problem that is common in children. It is a result of the brain and the eyes not working together. The brain ignores visual information from one eye, which causes problem with vision development. Treatment for lazy eye works well if the condition is found early. If left untreated, it causes permanent vision loss. So here in the Philippines, there are education for blind. There are also schools for children who have special needs. It is an educational institutions that have special education centers to assist these learners, and teachers are prepared to support these children. The center, they learn foundational skills before moving into mainstream classrooms. On the other hand, there are still numerous learners in the population who cannot afford to support their needs for education. It may be the reason why some students will stop going to school. But the Philippine government provides extra care for the blind and made centers for the education of the blind. This is the Republic Act number 3562, an act to promote the education of the blind in the Philippines. Teachers also prepare different strategies to support learners with visual impairment. Due to lack of instructional materials and technology in our country, they may not be able to support all kinds of visual impairment. But there are available different strategies for teachers that they may use if they encounter learners with visual impairment. There is a range of inclusive teaching and assessment strategies that can assist all learners to learn. Here are some specific strategies that are useful in teaching a group which includes learners with vision impairment. The first one is prepare as much information as possible in electronic format. This makes it much easier to provide materials in accessible formats and allow users with disabilities to adapt the information to a format which is suitable for them. Second one is, for students with vision impairment, your teaching style will need to be verbal. Think about how to communicate information to students who cannot see what you are doing. The third one is verbalize what is written on the blackboard and PowerPoints. Talk through any calculations as they are made or procedures as they are carried out. Read any printed information and describe any charts or graphs being used. The fourth one is give consideration and prepare alternatives for academic activities. The fifth one is inform the learner if you plan to use videos, slides, or PowerPoints, and discuss alternative ways of presenting the necessary information. Seventh is let the learners with vision impairment to see the film or video beforehand. This will enable them to sit very close to the screen or have someone explain the film or the video. It will be helpful to pause on the important points when the learner is viewing the resource in class with others. 8 is learners may not be able to read your handwritten comments, so teachers should provide alternative feedback mechanisms with the learner. So that's all for this lesson. I hope you learned something new.
Good day everyone, I'm Lino Jaster Okbian. I'm going to present to you the Lesson 10 Learners with Hearing Impairment. Lesson objectives. First, affective. Describe the types of educational program philosophical approaches, and instructional strategies for students with hearing impairment. Second, cognitive. Explain the effect of hearing impairment on intellectual, social, and emotional development. Enumerate and describe the causes and classification of hearing loss. And for the last, psychomotor. Demonstrate a clearer understanding about hearing impairment and exhibit a good simulation of appropriate teaching and assessment strategies fitted for this type of learners. Hearing impairment, also called auditory impairment, is defined as an impairment in hearing, whether permanent or fluctuating, that adversely affect a child's educational performance. Deafness is defined as hearing impairment that is so severe that the child is impaired in processing linguistic information through hearing with or without amplification. Thus, deafness may be viewed as a condition that prevents an individual from receiving sounds in all or most of its form. In contrast, a child with hearing loss can generally respond to an auditory stimuli including speech. Conductive hearing loss is caused by damage or obstruction in external or middle ear that disrupt the efficient passage of conduction of sound through those chamber. Post-conductive losses can be treated medically. However, repeated conductive losses can affect children's language development. Second, sensorineural hearing loss is caused by the damage to the inner ear or auditory nerve that transmit impulses to the brain. Sensorineural hearing loss tends to be more severe, permanent, and usually affect oral language development. Third, mixed hearing loss. It is a combination of a conductive and sensorineural hearing loss. For the last, central hearing disorder. These are the result of disorder or dysfunction in a central auditory system between the brainstem and auditory cortex in the brain. On learning development, variation in causes, onset, degree, and type of hearing loss, as well as family and educational situation, result in widely diverse hearing impairment population. However, learners with auditory impairment characteristically experience significant issues about social and intellectual development, speech and language, and educational achievement. Social development. Social emotional development in children with hearing impairment follows the same developmental pattern as those without a hearing loss. However, since social emotional development relies heavily on communication, the student with hearing impairment may not participate in cooperative play or learning activities. Without a common communication system, the ability to develop friendship is negatively impacted. Intelligence. Research has determined that individuals with hearing impairments have normal cognitive ability in the absence of any coexisting disability. Any difficulties in performance appears to be closely associated with speaking, reading, and writing the English language, not the level of intelligence. Speech and language. Speech and language skills are the areas of development most severely affected for those with hearing impairment, particularly for children who are born deaf. For individuals with mild or moderate hearing loss, the effect may be minimal, especially with early diagnosis and treatment. Children with more profound hearing impairments and deafness are unable to access auditory feedback, impairing the normal development of speech and language. Educational achievement. The educational achievement of the student with hearing impairment may be significantly delayed in comparison to that of their hearing peers. Students with hearing impairment have considerable difficulty succeeding in an educational system that depends primarily on spoken word and written language to transmit knowledge. Education for the deaf in the Philippines. The 2010 census reports that 20% of the Filipinos who have disabilities are in the age group of 0 to 14. The earlier 2000 census estimates 5.8 of those who have disability over 45,000 to be persons who have form of hearing impairment. The Department of Education has reported only about 15% of children with hearing impairment to be enrolled in school. Data gathering by civil society estimate actual enrollment of children with disability to be even less than 10%, and for the deaf children even lower. Barriers in the education of the deaf are interrelated and complex. The accessibility law is only for built environments and does not cover information and communication. There is no national system for sign language interpreting. Programs for sign language instruction and interpreter training are all done by a handful of nonprofit organizations with no government regulation. Teachers act as interpreters in classrooms and are also pulled away from their duties to interpret in trial courts, police station, etc. Teacher education programs have no sign language instruction, and public school teachers are typically hired with zero signing skill or given a crash course on pre-service training for a few weeks, and possibly an annual in-service training. Upgrading of signing skill. Colleges or universities, whether public or private, typically do not shoulder expenses for sign language interpreting. Most deaf graduates end up teaching in private school or shift to other forms of livelihood to survive.
Teachers started implementing their own rules to help accommodate the disabled children in their class. Here are some of the strategies to use.
The first one will be encouraging the deaf students to sit in the front to avoid distractions. This is important since deaf students learn to lip read, so they need a clear view on the speaker's mouth movement. Note that some students may feel uncomfortable to sit in the front. Repeat clearly any questions asked by learners in the class before giving a response. This is important to understand each other. Do not speak when facing the blackboard. This is to make sure that the students with hearing impairment can easily follow what you said. Be aware that mustache, beards, hands, books, or microphones in front of your face can add to the difficulties of lip readers. Distribute handouts. This is to make sure they can follow the discussion or lesson. Provide written materials. Just like what I said earlier, this is to support them in following the lesson. Allow the learners to record lectures to let them watch it again. Make sure to give them the list of subject-specific jargon and technical terms which they'll need to learn in advance and not to make them outcast in the class. Any videos or films used should, where possible, be captioned. If you can present them this way, consider taking an alternative route. Control the discussion so that only one person is speaking at a time. This is very important for the students with hearing impairment because they can't lip read everyone who speaks at the same time. Learners with hearing loss, especially those with associated speech issues, may prefer to have another classmate present their tutorial papers. Language abilities are often affected by hearing loss, depending on the age of onset. Learners who acquired their hearing loss early in life may have literacy issues. In some cases, providing reading lists well before the start of hours for learners with a hearing loss can be beneficial. Consider tailoring these reading lists when necessary and provide guidance to key texts. Where live remote captioning is provided, a transcript of the session can usually be assessed within 24 hours. It is recommended that this be emailed directly to the learner as an accurate record of references.